Good evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to today's webinar jointly hosted by KMA Research Committee and the East African Medical Journal, alongside other partners, APHRC and KEMRI. The theme for today's webinar is research in the COVID-19 pandemic era. We've been hosting these webinars on publishing and medical research, and it would be injustice to not have a session to talk about COVID as being in the middle of a pandemic. The chair of the EAMJ board, Professor Okeo, is unable to join us today. He was recently bereaved. We've also lost a colleague, Professor Boaz Otieno Nunya, as well as other colleagues to the pandemic, which is very sad, and we condole with all these colleagues. I just want, before we begin, we have two esteemed speakers, but before we get to them, I want to acknowledge the presence of our KMA National Executive and National Governing Council members joining us this evening, and we'll hand over to the President, Dr. Were, to make some welcoming remarks before we proceed. Thank you. Karibu, President.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bonyo. I know it's late from where you are in Australia, but you're happy that you're still able to serve KMA from wherever you are. So I think as you have guided, we can hold a minute of silence in remembrance for Professor Boaz Nunya, who has been an active participant and a convener in Kenya Medical Association, where he focused more on sexual and reproductive health rights, and also was instrumental towards initiating research, especially in the slums areas of Nairobi, and also in Kilifi, with a view of getting data to inform decision making as far as sexual and reproductive health rights are concerned. So I think we can hold a moment of silence in remembrance of this great member of KMA. Okay, so thank you. I think if I may, I might go ahead and open the meeting. I think the topic is timely, and I think especially in this at a difficult time that we find ourselves. Actually, today we were just having a discussion in our meeting for CAC, for KMA, where we were discussing about whether we should recommend for initiation of the vaccination amongst pregnant women in Kenya, and also for the under 18s, now that this Delta variant is ravaging those particular groups. So I think actually this topic is very timely in that it will encourage us to be able to generate local data which we can actually consume, because one of the issues that difficulties that we are getting is the vaccines used in the American and most of you by the mRNA vaccines compared to the vector-based vaccines that we have deployed in Kenya. And so we find in those countries that have come up with recommendations that they are safe to be used in pregnant women, but we cannot blanketly adopt that without having local data to support such initiatives in a local setup based the fact that we're actually using a vector-based AstraZeneca vaccine. So I think this is encouraging, and I'll encourage EAMJ to reach out to most of the doctors, because I know there's some of the local data that have been generated, so that we can be able even to publish one one dedicated like journal on COVID data that has been generated from African content. I think with the guidance from the Research and Ethics Committee and for two eminent speakers, Professor Luoch and Professor Mwanda, who are with us today, I think we can be able to be guided in ways in which you can do this better and leverage on our partnership with KEMI and APHRC in doing this. So I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting and hope we're going to learn a lot from two eminent professors. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Bonyo.
Great. Thanks very much, Dr. Were, for that introduction. We'll get straight into it. We've got two eminent speakers, well known in medical field in Kenya, who I'll first start by introducing Dr. Joseph Luoch, who is a consultant physician and chest specialist at the Nairobi Hospital. He qualified in 1968 and obtained his physician specialization in the United Kingdom. He has been a head of the National TB Program, was the director of the Respiratory Disease Research Center and honorary lecturer at the University of Nairobi Medical School till 1986. He's also held other positions such as chair of NHIF, KEMRI board. Very importantly, he has authored over 60 papers in both local and international peer-reviewed journals, and he has authored his autobiography, In the Footsteps of My Father, a book on historical perspectives. Karibu, Dr. Luoch, you can share your screen and get started. Just ask everyone to kindly mute your microphones. If there's any questions, just put them in the chat box and we'll attend to them at the Q&A session. Karibu, Dr. Luoch.
Thank you. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, I can hear you and we can see your screen. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, KMA, for giving me this opportunity to share you some of my views about the COVID pandemic and the digital transformation in medical research. This gives me good memories. As you know, in the early 70s, we were in the team that actually started KEMRI. I was the team that drew up the Act, Biomedical Research Act, drafted it and started KEMRI. So I've been in research for some time. It's interesting to have developed, see how technology has developed over the years. When we were doing a TB research in the 70s, now you're comfortable with a small smartphone on your palm. Those days, the computer was the size of a family fridge and was kept in a cold room. And it was a huge thing. And only one, and we had not developed so-called personal computers. It was just one in a center. And I hate to imagine what type of information we were getting those days. Most of it actually were done by statisticians using the old system of mathematics. Now the computer has taken over. So it's difficult to talk about anything these days without involving the COVID-19, which has changed all our political, social, economical, and scientific life. And that's why when I thought of talking medical research and technology and COVID-19. Now in COVID-19 pandemic, the important elements that is conducting or directing research are artificial intelligence, we talk about more that, data science, and technology. These are the issues that are now directing medical research. Now, in COVID-19 pandemic, there's urgency and severity because the mortality and the suffering is high. There are a lot of threats, but at the same time, we have opportunities that occur because of the research. It's interesting, at the beginning of COVID, everybody knew nothing. And certainly from ignorance, we've come in within less than a year, there's a lot of knowledge that's already been assessed in the COVID-19 pandemic. There are a lot of volume of information which is pouring out on digital platform, some of them being titles as new evidence. New is the word because they're actually new. And in this pandemic, patients and physicians are very overwhelmed with the severity and the mortality of COVID-19. So they want quick answers to improve patient outcome. And for that reason, it's quite possible that they accept a low-level evidence, for they cannot wait for the usual time to complete a standard randomized clinical trial, which is the gold standard for evidence-based medicine and takes, on the average, about 5 years to really have a serious trial. So applying a typical evidence-based management in pandemic seems very difficult because the pandemic is characterized by uncertainty, high potential loss, there's time pressure, there's competing values, as I said earlier, values regarding economy, politics, and social, and of course, science. So we can not really do proper research to get sufficient evidence-based medical practice because of those competing values. The pandemic has really resulted in a huge changes in the way we now perform research, particularly clinical trials. A cross-cutting theme throughout many of these changes has been the rapid advancement of technology use in medicine. We know that for the last 3 decades, a lot of technology has improved in medicine, but in the last year, it has been shifted to a higher gear because of the need or the demand of COVID-19 management. This has resulted in massive acceleration of technology development to high-speed gear. Now you can reduce research that used to take years, 5 years, can now be reduced to a matter of weeks. We have got big data analytics that allow rapid progress in gene sequencing. Efficacy and toxicity of new drugs can be studied or analyzed simultaneously even on the computer, as we shall see shortly. Now, at the steering wheel of all this development in technology and research is artificial intelligence, which has now proved a powerful tool in medical research and medical treatment and medical diagnosis. And for our present purposes, it really involves machine learning, natural language processing, and computer vision, which applications which imply teaching computers to use big database models for pattern recognition, explanation, and prediction. In fact, pattern recognition is very important, and you may realize that the symptom of poor smell in COVID patient was not identified by the human being, but it was identified by the computer that recognized that pattern. Artificial intelligence is the one that brought it out. Then, of course, somebody may say that recognized it, but it was the computer that recognized it. And there are many other symptoms in COVID that were actually not recognized by the human beings, by the artificial intelligence. So the use of computer model to model intelligent behavior, which mimic human intervention. The machine and their computer program are capable of solving a lot of problems. And like a human brain, they can also do a lot of thinking. And when you come to the natural language processing and translation, you have pattern recognition, visual perception, and decision. Now, language process is very important. And then the Canadians have developed the so-called the Blue Boy that can recognize or can read 86 languages, whether they're written in the form of medical papers or newspapers. Now, this is important, particularly during the outbreak of COVID, because if whatever was reported anywhere in the world, either in the local daily and or print media on the internet, if you program the Blue Boy, it was able to read all the language and find out which particular symptoms of COVID or what models or what is working where, and see how many countries are having the same kind of reporting the same pattern of the disease and using the same medicine and having the same results or having the same problem. It's incredible for it. So what it can do with it, it can read thousands of papers in a matter of minutes in different languages. And that has made life very interesting. So machine learning is one of the most exciting areas for development of approach to make this data. It's got the advantage that it can return a lot of information. Most of us, even smart people like us, cannot return so much information. And they become smart over time. A few of us degenerate over time, but machines don't become smarter. They're not susceptible to sleep deprivation, distraction, or information overload. You cannot overload them. And they don't have a problem with short-term memory loss as a lot of the human beings. And above all, they cannot go on strike. They do not demand any salary, increase in salary for the little work they do. Now, in the big data era, artificial intelligence and network medicine offer cutting-edge application of information science which can be able to define disease, can do medicine, therapeutics, and identify targets, but most importantly, with the least error. And you can accelerate drug repositioning and repurposing, for which all AI purposes are not just formidable, but also necessary. In fact, AI has now revolutionized drug discovery by extracting hidden patterns and evidence for biomedical data. And a lot of medicine can just be programmed out by artificial intelligence. Currently, since the onset of COVID pandemic, so many countries and so many institutions are producing a lot of medical publication on COVID itself. If I say that every week there are no less than 2,000 publications in different languages every week from all parts of the world. I'm sure if you have equally active in Kenya, with all more than 40 counties, probably you'll be publishing something at least every week, some reports every week from 47 countries. So if you do that in many parts of the world, it comes to millions in a month. Now, machine learning approaches can rapidly survey all those actual population and identify research hotspots and area warranting exploration. In fact, this manual assessment of this scope would be overwhelming for the human being, but machine learning can do it very well. It proved very useful in vaccine research. In fact, a lot of people were doubting whether the vaccine was real vaccine because it was developed in less than 6 months. I mean, we discovered COVID virus in a year, and within the same year, we already developed the vaccine for it. So everybody was wondering how it happened, and that's why there's a lot of vaccine hesitance at the beginning, because they're not very sure that this was real or whether it was fake. But in a move to progress COVID-19 treatment, there come a number of organizations working dedicated, and they publish articles and database to fast start the process of vaccine research. And they can simply make use of AI-based machine learning algorithms to save several volumes of research pages to find out the exact solution for developing vaccine. And this has become very handy. Okay. If you take the ANN, artificial neural network, which is used to predict antigenic region within high density of binders, that is the antigenic hotspot, this information is critical development of vaccine. And using machine learning for this purpose allows rapid scanning of entire viral protein, allowing faster and cheaper vaccine development. And with the large amount of data that is being generated while studying COVID-19 process, machine learning allows for analysis and rapid identification of a lot of patterns that make traditional mathematical and statistical tool would take years to at least to analyze. It's been said that I know Professor Mwandis used to work in the lab in hematology, but now current research has jumped from the lab to the computer, and most of the research is now done on the computer and not in the stool sitting in the laboratory. And AI has a potential to contribute to new drug discovery. And a number of research labs and others have indicated that they are recruiting AI to search for treatment and vaccine that can speed up both process of discovering new drugs as well as vaccines. For example, Google DeepMind has predicted the structure of proteins of the virus, important information that can also be used in developing new drugs, not just for COVID treatment, but also for general treatment. The battle against COVID has proved provide a very new impetus for genome sequencing tools. The web-based bioinformatics pipeline, the genome detective coronavirus typing tool, can identify and classify coronavirus genome at 2,000 sequences per submission. With analysis of a new whole genome sequence, it takes just a minute, or what would otherwise have been taking several months. It also identifies changes to the nucleotide coding regions and protein using a novel dynamic aligner to allow tracking of new viral mutation as an aid to developing diagnostics, drugs, and vaccine, which is very important. So indeed, machine learning has shifted medical research technology to high-speed gear. The flood of available data now, as I said earlier, particularly with the advent of internet, you put all the information on the internet, is increasing the computational power. So the growing up progress is available algorithms and theory developed by researchers in creating support from industry is also becoming very vital. And this is why now we need a lot of cloud computing, which is the delivery of computing services, including servers, not like for our election, storage, data, networking, software, intelligence over the internet. That's why it's called the cloud, to offer faster innovation, flexible resources, and economy of scale. In fact, cloud computing is the on-demand availability computer system resources, especially for data storage. And I say we have so much data now that you need a lot of special computer, because your ordinary computer will, the CPU will become easily full of power. You need a lot of extra this to take some of the information if you go by the millions of data we are receiving every week in the COVID. Large clouds often have functions distributed over the multiple locations, and each being located, being a data center. So a data center, and it's apart from the computer, I mean the data, the cloud computer, there are also some supercomputers and found by several companies such as Tencent, Didi, Huawei, that are being used by researchers to fast track the development of cure, vaccine, or other drugs. The speed that this system can run calculation and model solutions is much faster than the standard computing process that most of you will be familiar with. Okay, so AI technology has been developed to analyze a diverse array of health data, including patient data. Now, this is very important because as we record all the information about the patients we treat in each unit, and there may be millions of units in the world, and if you have proper electronic health recording, so this all information can be available to the whole world, however whether the millions or billions, and if you decide to search for one data, whether you want to see the age or the sex or the nationality or the the eye, the height, the weight, to find out which is common in COVID or another disease. This multi-omic approaches will give you clinical, behavior, and environmental and drug data that encompasses the whole biomedical literature when you're studying a patient. And this makes life easier for, instead of you setting out to start studying something afresh with a detailed program, you only need to go to get the data from other places. And now we have, because of the internet, the world has become a global village. So you can do multi-center investigation and get in very varied information with high throughput technology, have revolutionized medical research. The advent of genotyping arrays enables large-scale genome and wide association studies. These are some of the omics, as you'll be familiar with, such as proteomics and metabolomics, often incorporated into every methodology of biological research. So multi-omic offers opportunity to understand the flow information that underlies any disease. The addition of omics to a molecular term basically implies that comprehensive or global assessment of set of molecules. The first omic discipline, of course, to appear was the genomics, focused on the study of entire genome as opposed to genetics, that is integrated individual variants or a single disease. So genomic study provide a very useful framework for mapping and studying specific genetic variants contributed to both Mendelian and complex diseases. The omic field has been driven largely by technological advances that have made it possible at cost-efficient, high throughput analysis of all biological molecules that human beings may have not done easily. So multi-omic data refers to the biological process where different omics data, such as I've said earlier, genomics, proteomics, transcriptomics, and omics are jointly collected and analyzed. That is the. Now, talking about clinical trial in pandemic, there are several challenges. You need selection of patients is different because you don't have the leisure of who to choose. Some people choose themselves. Everybody is sick, so everybody should be on trial because some of them are very severely sick. It's an emergency. You cannot determine the sample size. It becomes very difficult to decide who you are excluded from trial because everybody is affected by COVID, whether the children, whether the pregnant mothers, they also need to be included in the trial because they're also affected. You want to know what happens to them. People with comorbidities, hypertension, diabetes, and women of childbearing potential. All these may not be excluded because under normal randomized clinical trial, this would be a form exclusion. but this cannot apply ethically when you are considering COVID pandemic. There's a lot of participation at risk. Trial blinding may be an issue. Randomization, patient may choose to be there. Whether informed consent, some of patients don't even have informed consent, and you don't even have enough information to give the patient informed consent. There are several ethical considerations to be put in place, and the control and clinical endpoints will not be what you expecting as typical randomized clinical trial, because we are trying to save the patient from this, and you have to do a lot of communication, some of which will be virtual. In fact, most of them will be virtual because you don't want contact with a lot of patients. In fact, it's Zoom as we're doing now. Trial managers, range information platform, discussion group, committees, everything will be on virtual, and a lot of things have been moved from primary outcome data collection, even that is collection online, because of the infection between for the doctors as well as other workers. You do not want the patients to allow technology to allow you remote recognition of participation, even application of consent forms can be done online where possible. Digital consent means new standards of research. We protect the researchers' infection control. Once they profess accuracy, it gives the patients time to read and understand, well, it's efficient and been shown to be higher compliance than what we do. I'm sure I'm getting off them, so give me another 5 minutes. The trial design is very different from what we've been using in randomized clinical trial. Particularly in this case, you'll have to have an adaptable or sequential design, responsive adaptive randomization, or historical dynamic borrowing. They have multi-stage and multi-trial arm. You have shared strategies, and you aim at picking the winner, which is difficult. And most of all, you use the bias theorem, which is a mathematical formula designed by some English statisticians several years ago. And it describes the probability of an event based on prior knowledge. You had some knowledge, so you know what's likely to happen in the condition that might be relevant to the event. So in the design, in bias design, you're doing a control trial, you continually update the evidence and estimate the effect of the results of probability, rather than doing the p-values and you have very intervention trials. Negative result is as good as positive results. The threat of COVID-19 is striking the global, instilling fear and anxiety among people. However, the development of groundbreaking technologies such as artificial intelligence and big data, along with the cross collaboration of healthcare leaders, scientists, and researchers, gives us a ray of hope in detecting, understanding, and stopping the spread of COVID-19. In medical research and COVID, we are dying to survive. In a time of uncertainty, facts provide clarity. In time of anxiety, facts comfort. In time of misinformation, facts correct. In time of division, facts unite. And in time of crisis, facts matter most. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Loach, for sharing those insights on technology and the speed with which research is moving due to technology. It's actually interesting that you highlighted the fact that we normally take about 15 to 20 years to do trials to get us a vaccine. And this time around for COVID, it took just within less than a year. Some of the technologies that you've talked about, one of our very young KMA members, Dr. Ryan Nyotu, is doing very interesting work on network analysis and intelligence that has really shortened the duration of traditional epidemiology. So we'll keep our questions to Dr. Loach until the end. I'll move quickly to introducing the next speaker, who doesn't need much introduction to all of us. Professor Walter Mwanda is a professor of hematology and blood transfusion. He joined the faculty of the University of Nairobi in 1992. He has been chairman of the Department of Human Pathology, Hematology, and Blood Transfusion, and was director of the University of Nairobi Institute of Tropical and Infectious Disease, that's UNITID. He chaired several professional bodies nationally and internationally and published widely. He has been the head of pediatric oncology since 1994 and is keen on producing a generation of mentor supervisors and trainers. Today, he's going to share with us insights about lessons learned during conducting research in the COVID-19 era. Again, I'll ask us to please keep our microphones on mute and save any questions till the end. You can keep typing them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. Karibu, Professor Mwanda.
Thank you so much. It's difficult to talk after Dr. Luach has talked actually. I'll try my best. The only difference is that some of us consider ourselves as BBC, born before computers. So I'll still go on the usual born before computer style. May I thank AMA and EAMJ for giving me the opportunity to say something about COVID. Some of us have also written some aspects, particularly regarding hematology and COVID. My emphasis tonight is lessons learned. They don't say whether they are good lessons or bad lessons. Now, the outline of my presentation is I'll give a brief background, and the background will cover research, intentions of research, relevance of research, and then talk about COVID. I'll also give a background of why we need clinical research and its component. As has already been said, research sometimes has issues waiting to be sorted out, but that does not usually go in well with clinical or medical pragmatism. And I'll say something about research efforts so far, observations made, give a short summary and conclusion. Research requirements in pandemics are predictable, as are usually in conducting research in good times. Key components of research must always be adhered to. Basically, research conceptualization, proposal, funds, ethical clearance, data collection, writing, and finally, dissemination of findings. However, within these, there are tweaks. These tweaks are based on funding resources, sources, preferences, researchers' composition, teams, multidisciplinary, multi-institutional, and multi-center activities. These may determine how research is processed. We know also that collaborative government grants based with stated outputs and outcomes. These sometimes also tend to tilt the expected outcome on implementation of research. However, all of them will lead to some form of implementation and publications. The relevance of clinical research is no doubt. Dr. Luach has clearly enumerated the relevance, irrespective of the way it is done. Clinical research is indeed a component of health research. Its values is to produce knowledge valuable for understanding the human disease, preventing and treating illness, and finally promoting health. Clinical research involves interactions with patients, diagnostics, all data and populations in any of the ways disease and human beings interact. COVID-19 has created a global pandemic and highlighted the importance of research. The stable research infrastructure, funding for public emergency, our disaster preparedness, response, and resilience. If there's anything to learn about the state of research, it is that COVID has tested it to the limit. Stakes have never been higher as lives are lost, economies falter, lives radically changed. We are told the only thing that really did this was the Great Depression. COVID perhaps has upset that. Ultimate COVID mitigation and crisis resolution is dependent on high quality research aligned with the top priority societal goods that yield trustworthy data and actionable information. However, the disease so quickly spreading, unparalleled, ill understood, and new, required urgent and appropriate answers to contain it, treat patients and populations in general. As my colleague has said, everybody's a patient. It's difficult to know who is a participant in research and who is a patient. A participant may become a patient. A normal person may become a patient anytime in this time of COVID. However, tenets of clinical research during this public crisis has required communication, collaboration, prioritization, keeping current with changing evidence, maintaining high standards of scientific integrity and participant safety. Participants, particularly researchers, research institutions and research-intensive institutions, and affected persons. Research and clinical pragmatism. Something had to be done. Something had to be tried. There was a compulsion to try something. There was a desperate need to identify effective treatment and control measures. Initially, the standard of care was basically supportive. This manifested, as all of us remember, with significant morbidity and unparalleled mortality. Thereupon, the world descended on clinical research and went on to continue with observable progress and milestones achieved particularly in vaccine research. It was only through the research efforts that there's a bit of calm, yet the turbulence is still there. It is the realization that only way to prove or disapprove the efficacy of candidate strategies and to assess their safety was to conduct a well-designed, randomized, controlled clinical trial. This is after all had been tried and failed. In this, therefore, lessons are being learned, have been learned. The pressure to use drugs off-label or through single-patient compassionate use programs. Within months, results from such studies already demonstrate the clinical benefits and preliminary safety of the antiviral drugs remdesivir and the immunomodulatory dexamethasone, and indeed has demonstrated the lack of efficacy of previously and widely used drugs, hydrochloroquine and lopinavir and ritonavir. But behind this, there have been hind thoughts. Had we? Researchers demonstrated the resilience and ability to cope efficiently and effectively with unexpected crises. However, the past perils of an overfocus on short-term allocative efficiency at the price of lack of capability to deal with uncertain future challenges. This indeed is quite manifest in the low and medium countries and even the developed countries. So much so that one of the lessons learned is the realization that in normal times, building spare capability may seem inefficient, the cost potentially exceeding the benefits. However, here lies the fatal weakness of not doing so, is that this can leave health systems constrained when dealing with unexpected but ultimately inevitable shock as created by COVID-19. The silver lining has been that vaccines typically take 10 to 15 years to develop, but as of May last year, just a few months, 3 months, nearly 100 vaccines were in development, 8 in trial. As of now, several vaccines already have had emergency approval within 12 to 18 months. However, it is too soon for long-term effectiveness and safety to be stated. In doing this, challenges have been acknowledged. Antibody testing necessary for diagnosis, therapeutics, and vaccine testing presented some of the greatest research challenge, including validity, timing, availability, and prioritization of testing, interpretation of test results, and appropriate patient and societal actions based on results. Communication and engagement has been one of the most important things. Indeed, Dr. Walsh talked of thousands of information, research papers, research observations being made. So much so that foremost, initiating broad communication and engagement of everyone concerned on a regular and ongoing basis, patients and their families, service providers, scientists and colleagues, research clinicians and staff, research administration and IRB and contacts offices, medical schools and hospital leaders, public affairs, and the media. This, to say the least, has been very efficient. And if there is one lesson to be learned, this has been learned as one of the most important things, albeit the interpretation. Reaching out to colleagues across the disciplines to foster new ideas and initiate new collaborations. As an example, was to engage transfusion medicine and blood banks to establish a study to collect convalescent plasma from people who recovered from COVID-19 for later use in randomized clinical trials. This is still going on, at least in some places. Initiation of virtual scientific forums for basic translational and clinical researchers and clinicians across multiple disciplines to come together, exchange knowledge, ideas, promote discussion and plans. Of course, with human beings, conflicts among stakeholders have manifested, but quickly settled and continuing to advance what was thought were the best clinical ideas. Use of broad dialogue to evaluate and prioritize research plans, institute an all hands on deck strategy to engage research laboratories and clinical research units. All hands on deck means even the topmost, the head of the unit has had to be on the desk, on the bench, on the discussion table to help. This also has required deploy research clinicians and staff as needed from other areas. Keeping current with the changing and rapidly changing field. It is now Delta. The other time it was India. The other time it was China. What next? It requires having virtual meetings between the departments of medicine, infectious diseases, and indeed all disciplines, including hospital leadership and conference facilities, presentation, discussions as this one, and synthesis of the latest available data. Maintain standards of scientific integrity, ethical study conduct, and participants' safety. Prioritization has actually marked the current research trends in the COVID era. Reorganization and realization created to keep pace with research. Research resources, facilities, and infrastructure, capability and sustainability through teaching and learning, innovation and technology, competitiveness and platforming of the research environment, reduce on-site research activity deemed only essential. Aspects of research that were possibly easy to carry remotely are carried out remotely. Dry laboratory research carried out remotely and active therapeutic clinical trials remain ongoing. Research activities that were deemed critical were permitted. One designated critical laboratory only and only permitted members are allowed on site. University researchers and institutions of high research activities continue published and deposited in the protein bank data for the first structure of the COVID main protein only weeks after the disease erupted in China. Universities created internal funding mechanisms for coronavirus research. For example, the Penn State University. Investigators quickly moved to deliver solutions to the personal protective equipment crisis. Universities, cell and DNA repositories set up high throughput COVID-19 detection facilities to test up to 10,000 samples daily. I repeat, 10,000 samples daily. Engineers at some universities, for example, Wisconsin University, collaborated with the local industry to design and provide open source plans for manufacturing face shield. Here, obviously, we can mention Jomo Kenyatta University that produced the sanitizer, and many others. The power of basic biomedical research continued delivering solutions to the COVID-19 pandemic as exemplified by Sheffield emergency use, authorization for a 45-minute point of care test, an Abbott Laboratory announcement of less than 15 minutes point of care test. Interpreting research findings has faced a bit of challenge. The challenges of quick implementing these discoveries and conduct in the fight against remained a logistic and political one, requiring universities to work closer with private and government agencies, sometimes not to the benefit of the masses. Research administration has also had its share of the input. Stipulated agency for high quality and rapid turnover of COVID-19 related research in the review boards, biosafety issues. Some of them went further to contract functions in institutions where they were better done. They transformed the working of those key regulatory functions to new levels of efficiency. Repurposing marketed drugs to treat COVID-19 was being well publicized, with the hope for cures stretching beyond scientific validated data. We know so much about hydrochloroquine and remdesivir, were each undergoing a number of well-designed clinical trials which were needed to accurately assess efficacy. In this era, collaboration and partnership have been the hallmark of how this globalization is now more of a village. The trend is for institutions to foster networks, partnerships, and linkages to enhance their competitiveness. A paper by Jonathan et al. Et al. Includes one of us here, stated a global infectious disease research collaboration in crisis, building capacities and inclusivity through cooperation. Noted the dilemma is such wide-reaching impact mandated multidisciplinary collaborations on a global scale. International research collaborations as the only means to rapidly address fundamental questions and potentially change the paradigm of data sharing for the benefit of the patients throughout the world. International research collaborations present significant benefits, but also barriers that need to be surmounted, especially in low and middle income countries. Effect on research institutions and researchers. It presented added institutional responsibilities and challenges. These institutions ensure continuity of ongoing clinical research, have ensured increased COVID-related research, ensure safety of employees and students, and enforce social distancing measures and other measures to contain the spread of the disease as dictated by the relevant state authorities. Ensure continuing the education of undergraduates and postgraduates in regards to research, restricted non-essential non-COVID research activities, maintain required animal care resources where the animals are required for research. Investigators had to employ multiple approaches to cope with the on-site research restriction and shutdowns. It means only a few members have had to work overtime. Researchers had to maintain critical research activities, continue to submit publications, balance work and family responsibilities, initiated or collaborated on COVID-19 related research. Ensure limited on-lab staff, engage in remote research opportunities, maintain regular and frequent communications with trainees and co-workers, continue to plan and write grants. Research disruptions threaten the career of physician scientists, so much so that some of them have gone back to the wards and clinics to handle the patients and leave the research arena alone. The essential research only is a product of the pandemic that has curtailed most academic industries and government basic science and clinical research, or redirected these activities to research on COVID-19. Most clinical trials, except those testing life-saving therapies, have paused, and most continuing trials are now close to new enrollment. However, research in progress, physician scientist career, the research workforce, ongoing and other funders' activities shifted to provide guidance on proposal submission, award management, and implement allowances that enable grant personnel to be paid in time to be relaxed. Researching institutions have implemented strategies to mitigate the long-term effect of research disruption, support throughput, and retain current well-trained staff and personnel, and research support staff, accommodate research assets, laboratory supplies, and study participants. Due care and delegation involving animals models have also had to be managed. Research with the animal models was severely disrupted. Most of the accredited institutions benefited, however, from the existence of emergency prepared plans and reacted quickly to the changes to standard operating procedures to include long cage change intervals based on performance standards and reuse of PPEs have been implemented. Major frustrations of researchers included feeling unproductive and unable to advance potentially existing discoveries and being homebound and less active. Several ways to maintain research staff engagement while working remotely were presented. More time than ever to plan and write grants, write that long contemplated review article and submitted papers. Multidisciplinary engagement has been reinforced by the COVID-19 research team, whereas virologists are best suited to work on the COVID, also the ideal time to engage, and vice versa. Immunologists, computational modeling, and artificial intelligence experts, chemists, drug, and all other persons that have been are considered relevant. In all this, however, there is need for implementation science research. This is because of increased demand for maximization of resources, multisectoral and heterogeneity of society and communities, and rapid expansion of health services have created a high demand for competencies for effective implementation of projects and programs. May I give a typical example? Even the vaccines, there are people refusing to take the vaccines. There are people of implementation science should be ready to interpret this in the best way the society, the populace can take it. They need to demonstrate research that addresses implementation bottlenecks, identify optimal contextualized approach, and promote the uptake of research findings. Indeed, the valuable knowledge, skills, and remarkable advances in science with the discovery of new medicine, vaccines, and diagnostic tools have the capacity to lead to large-scale improvement in health. Yet, this is not so because of lack of proper implementation. In summary, research during the COVID-19 shows that research cannot be rushed, even with incentives. Rushed results often lead to inaccurate findings or even mistakes. Research has to be timely, ethical, correct, and context relevant so as to have the greatest and meaningful impact to society. Ensure data quality, reliability, and replicability. Method used be most up-to-date techniques considering the development in different disciplines. Research has manifested and exacerbated imbalance in carrying out research itself at different institutions, countries, and dissemination findings. Research in the COVID era has magnified disparities across institutions, researchers, and especially among institutions that are more reliant on international students and institutions that had no previous invested in technology that facilitates successfully on online instructions. Research during the COVID era has shown a number of scholars using the paid service of a rapidly growing number of organizations to collect their data. In conclusion, experience is the best teacher. There are successes and missteps so far in research in the COVID-19 era. Even in the greatest adversity, research shall be the anchor. And yes, we can. And yes, we shall win through research. Thank you.
Very, very well said. Thank you very much, Professor Mwanda, for sharing those insights on lessons learned about COVID. For those who have been in touch with the news, the CDC just announced 5 days ago, we are still battling the Delta variant. There is now the Epsilon and Lambda variants that have been reported to be resistant to the initial vaccines that have been produced. And as Professor Mwanda has said, I think COVID has tested research to its limits and continues to do so. We are now going to move into the discussion Q&A session, and I'll quickly hand over to Dr. Chris Baraza to take us through this session. Chris, karibu.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Obonyo, and thanks, Dr. Watch, Prof. Mwanda, for those very insightful discussions that we've had. I have just about 2 questions, actually 3 questions. I'll direct this to Dr. Aluoch. One of the participants is inquiring how effective are the modeling and prediction softwares in predicting disease occurrence. I remember in your discussion, you mentioned this in terms of artificial intelligence and how that has been used and how that's being used to effectively actually conduct research in this COVID-19 era. I would allow me, Prof, to just add another question so that you can respond to both of them at the same time. The COVID-19 again has exposed the geopolitical power struggles that have long existed in research. You've noticed probably publications and withdrawals of publications after a period of time, citing different reasons for that. So probably you just need to comment on that in terms of how has COVID-19 affected that, and are we seeing more of that, and are they because of the fast-tracked publications? Are we missing some steps in the process of publications, or what is it that has necessitated some of the withdrawals of some of the published data that we have? The third question to you, Dr. Watch, is just to comment on the issue of ivermectin and efficacy in COVID-19 management. Probably I'll allow that you respond to those 3 aspects before I ask Prof. Mwanda 2 questions that have been directed to him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baraza. Excellent question. The first one, I think in general, it is, it's agreed that whatever man and I can do, AI will always do it better than man. And if you're going to do any prediction, a machine will be always better than man. And this has been shown clearly during the COVID era in many aspects, in many areas. Take, for example, the use of high-resolution CT scan in the diagnosis of COVID. It's been shown that the machine artificial intelligence gives you better and more accurate results than the human being. In fact, most radiologists now use artificial intelligence to make a diagnosis of HRCT when the PCR is doubtful or sometimes falsely negative. So in short, AI will always do it better than man. And this has been shown. There's a fear that sooner or later, artificial intelligence will replace the doctors in the very near future if they are not very careful in most cases. Certainly in radiology and diagnosis of cancer, histology, artificial, even dermatology. Now it's shown that artificial intelligence makes more accurate dermatological diagnosis. So we don't need a lot of dermatologists anyway, because it's very simple. The very procedures they do just diagnose some skin rash. So the artificial intelligence is already replacing a lot of them. Now, when it's, what was the second question? I'm getting old and forgetful. What was the second question?
There was a question, Dr. Alwoch, in relation to withdrawals of published data.
Yeah, but that is exactly what I was saying, that in COVID era and using some of these Bayesian algorithms for doing research, a negative result is as good as a positive result. And you see, you are not going to do the p-value the old way you're doing that randomized clinical trial, but you assume that something is going to work, then you see if it can work. If it doesn't work, then you remove it. And a lot of these things, at the moment, the truth is not a single drug has been proved to be useful in COVID-19, whatever name, whether you call it the monoclonal antibodies or antivirals, none of them has been proved beyond reasonable doubt that to be very useful. In fact, all of them are on trial and they start on and off. But as I said at the beginning, is the agency, although Dr. Mwanda doesn't agree that there should be agency in research, but people are dying. So you want to try anything, and some of these things, although here we're using them as drug, and a lot of patients are paying very heavy bills for using monoclonal antibodies. But these are basically on trial. They're not really a kind of approved medicine for treatment. So if under normal circumstances, they should be given free to this patient. On the contrary, the one who should be actually be paid for accepting to use the drugs. But the situation is completely different. COVID has made research a different ballgame. So we're doing a lot of things which ordinarily we would not do. So it has changed research completely. So we no longer, we can no longer, and we'll never go to the old normal of doing the research again, as so long as COVID dictates a lot of these things. We have to change. So the most important thing in this world is that change is the only permanent thing. So we've been doing randomized clinical trial in a certain way, taking many years. That's out of question. We're no longer going back to that anymore. And we're going to use artificial intelligence and use less of the laboratory. And when it comes to publications, in fact, on the contrary, there have been so much collaboration. That's why it was easy to get a lot of information about drugs, because everybody's trying it, and there's so much internet connection between all the research centers, research institutions, and the individuals on the internet. You don't even need to write to them. Automatically, the paper is online. And I said, with machine learning that capable of reading all those languages, you're able to know what's happening in China, even if it's written in Chinese. So you can compare notes. So there's a lot of collaboration. You can no longer work in isolation in this IT age. It's a global village as far as technology is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alwoch. There was a third question for you to comment on the role of artificial intelligence, and especially whether there's any information as pertains to ivermectin and its efficacy in the management. I know you've touched on to that, but
Yes,
hope you don't mind just emphasizing on that point here.
Basically, what in this case, what artificial intelligence does is that many people use it in many countries and they give the report. So the machine learning will just sift data from various institutions to find out whether it's effective. Because one institution cannot give you sufficient information to make any conclusion. So don't have an instant answer for those one.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Loch, for those responses. Dr. Mwanda, Prof. Mwanda, you talked about institutions and how they have been able to change based on the COVID-19 responses that we've had. There's a question that touches on that in terms of Samuel Gashere is asking, kindly comment on local ethical approvals and permissions, with some institutions have been on panic mode, not making it easier for researchers to access patients for research. And this negates the rapidity needed in the COVID era. Just to add on to that, there's I note the contrary again, that some ethical review boards or committees have actually placed waivers for fast tracking or faster processing of COVID-related research proposals. So probably on just your comment on that, whether there has been any observed enhanced publications based on those such waivers to promote local research towards actually having more publications coming from our country, Kenya. So Prof. Mwanda probably could respond to those two questions for now, kindly.
If I can respond sort of indirectly, at the Kenyatta National Hospital, University of Nairobi,
yeah,
non-award or non-degree awards proposals that were approved in 2019
yes,
were 124. The ones that were approved in 2020 were 128. So nearly the same.
yeah.
However, the publications have not matched the kind of activities. You may have noted during my talk that there's a lot still going on, particularly online, what is called dry research, but the publications have not been many. In fact, when I looked at the publications from Kenya alone, in peer-reviewed, recognized journals, they were less than 10. However, there are those that have been published in the so-called predatory journals, which actually give very conflicting information. These again are no more than 30. So one wonders what is going on. There are research approvals, but then there are not as many publications as one would want to see. So there is a disconnect. The disconnect here comes after the approval, the funding. One of the activities that have been affected is the funding of research other than those that are COVID-19 based. And that's why we are seeing the difference. I also take note that some of our IRBs have actually waived the fees they were charging for the proposal processing. The meetings still continue monthly. As much as I know, the one in Kenyatta National Hospital and University of Nairobi, and the one in Cambridge, and the one in MTC, the meetings still are held on as regularly as they used to be.
Thanks so much, Prof, for that. And you bring to the fore a very important question. why isn't it that what is hindering the translation of what people are talking about on social media into proper research? Why is it that you're not publishing what you're talking about? Are there any stumbling blocks in the process of publishing that have not been maybe have been made worse by the COVID-19 or have not been lifted by virtue of having certain waivers in the COVID-19 research dispensation? So Dr. Bonyo, I see you've raised your hand. You could go ahead with your question, please.
Thanks very much, Chris. The question I have to both our panelists this evening is, I think COVID is not going away anytime soon. We have about over 100,000 patients who've been treated and probably recovered, and about 4,000 who haven't, who unfortunately didn't make it. How should we go about studying long COVID? What are your thoughts about the long-term effects of COVID in this cohort of patients? Is AI the way to go, or should we start writing proposals to look at the usual clinical trials of looking at long-term COVID? Thank you.
I think, Dr. Bonyo, first and foremost, what we should do is to record the signs, the symptoms, and any other characteristics of these things in every medical institution. And this can be pulled together. Then you can use artificial intelligence to work them out. But you cannot just study a small group of people and make a good conclusion in this time and age of what exactly is the future. And with artificial intelligence can predict the future depending on the information you give them and what's happening at the present. So you have, unfortunately, artificial intelligence, you must give it some information for it to work on.
Thanks, Dr. Loch. Any comment, Prof. Mwanda?
Yes, as my colleague has said, and I do add, COVID, like cancer, once you've had it, you should be followed as long as we don't know, but as of now, for life. 2, I'm of the opinion that as far as we have reached with our number, we should be able to find out characteristics in our setting, in our patients, in our cohort. Those who have recovered, those who have been home-based, those who have been hospital-based, those who have been ICUs, those who have used all sorts of drugs, and be able to come out of, if possible, computerized characteristics, which we then should be able to match against the other people. It is only then that we can come up with a well-researched and documented impact, output, and where and when to go in this pandemic. I do believe that there are certain things that are different. There are certain things that are common. It is the differences that make the difference, that make research be such a sweet thing to do, and therefore anchor in management. As my colleague said, there is no single drug that can be said to be anti-COVID. Yet people are recovering. Can we figure out those who are recovering? What are their characteristics? I think that is the message I would want to put across. And my colleague has said, let's put the data into the computer through collaboration, through whatever means, and figure out what next.
Thank you, Dr. Mwanga. And in fact, I would ask you if you can, since we are in the academia, maybe you should design whether I call it a form or a questionnaire that maybe you should be filling, give encourage the doctors to fill so that information is standardized as it is brought forward, as it is computerized, so that people don't know what to ask for, that type of thing. We need somebody to kind of be on that driver to design a chart which can be online. You can put it online, so you don't have to print. When you're not paperless industry virtual, you can print it online so that they fill it for all your patients, and that will it's easier to analyze it. It's already online. That's some homework for you, Professor.
Thank you. Accepted.
Yeah, I'm sure Dr. Loach is driving a lot of experience from the HIV world, where so many things have been standardized nowadays. Probably can borrow from that also to be able to work out on the COVID-19 one. But Dr. Loach, I'm just thinking through, I know we are running short of time, but how common is the use of artificial intelligence in our setup, and how practical is it?
Well, it's been there. It's very intelligent. We use it in the laboratory. We use it at least in Narobosal, we're using it in the diagnosis of HSCT scan in the COVID. Yeah, I would say it's common, but it's used. And now we have even for diagnosing, screening for TB. And I think the program is already here. So instead of looking at X-ray and having 101 different interpretation when you're screening for TB, artificial intelligence will be more accurate and tell you, yes, this appearance is TB, this is not, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Loach, for that. I think time is not on our side. I want to appreciate your responses and the questions that have been raised during this session, and take the session back to Obonyo for finalization. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, once again, thanks very much to our speakers, and thanks, Chris, for that. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, you are almost coming to the end. Before we do close the meeting, I'm just going to call on Dr. Kigondu, Secretary General, to give a vote of thanks and officially close the meeting. Kigondu, tafadhali.
Thank you very much, Nchafasto, for hosting this webinar. Thank you very much to Dr. Loach for that beautiful presentation. An old man who is more advanced in ICT and things digital than some of us. I want to thank Professor Mwanda for that. I think KMA and EAMJ will continue giving these research topics for a long time, and we want to thank the National Executive Council for KMA for attending this and facilitating all this. It comes on the second Wednesday of every month, and we want to promote research, and we hope that these trainings have helped all of you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks everyone. The next webinar will be in second Wednesday of September. Goodbye. Thank you very much.